Hello everyone, welcome to the bottom line group of Alcoholics Anonymous. Can we have a moment of silence followed by a serenity prayer? God, grant me the serenity, accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm an alcoholic and a member of this group. My name's Doug. Is there anyone out there here for their first meeting, coming back from out of town? You'd like to introduce yourself? Which one?
My name's Mark.
Oh,
Jack, alcoholic, New Jersey, first day here.
hey Jack. Welcome.
I'm Raymond, alcoholic. I'm from Jersey, myself also. This is my first time at this meeting.
Welcome, Raymond.
Jersey Jack, Jersey
Hi, my name's Mike or Michael from Massachusetts. Been here about a week. Looking for part-time work, something other than my regular paycheck. And also, this is my first time at this meeting also.
Welcome. Anybody else? Okay. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Somebody over here like to read the 12 traditions off the wall there?
I'm a grateful alcoholic. My name is Billy. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Bill.
12 traditions. 1. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on AA unity. Tradition 2. Our group has but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself through our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. 3. The only requirement for AA membership is the desire to stop drinking. 4. Each group should remain autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 5. Each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6. An AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, least problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. 7. Every AA ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8. Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9. AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. And 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
Okay, we're going to pass the baskets now so as to not to interrupt the meeting in the midway point. Secretary's report for the bottom line. We have 58 meetings a week. They're listed on the green chalkboard. You need 2 years of sobriety to chair a big book. Anniversary nights held at the last Sunday of the month at 7 p.m. If you're celebrating a year or more, add your name to the anniversary board and we'll gladly celebrate with you. Business meetings are held the first Sunday of the month at 6:45 p.m. If you'd like to be a member of the bottom line, sign your name in the black book. You must be a member to vote. Literature and grapevines in the rack are for sale at cost. Please put the money in the basket here. Anybody here like to be a sponsor or need a sponsor? Just ask somebody to be a sponsor and get into the steps. Anyway. With that, I've been going to big book meetings for about 5 years straight now. Been sober for 13 years, and I don't know, I heard Joe and Charlie 3 times. I went to their seminar 3 times. It was pretty good. And there's a few other guys, you know, Zeke and a couple other guys I've heard go through the steps, and I got to tell you, Jim's about the most knowledgeable person I've ever heard speak. And I've been listening to him now for about 2.5 years, I guess. It's been a couple of years. Anyway, here's the Professor Jim.
Oh, hail, Big Book Buddha.
That's enough out of you, Billy. Okay, my name is Jim. I'm an alcoholic. Big book meeting around here wouldn't be the same without Doug there. Full professor, please. If you're going to introduce me, do it right. You know, my friend Billy here, he got it right too. Next time somebody comes up and asks you to borrow money, you got to recite the tradition to them. Every AA ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contribution. Okay, our joke maven, Audrey, has scored again. She laid a little jewel on me tonight. Let's see. What do you call a cross between a mafia don and a lawyer? That's an opera you can't understand. Oh, I got to tell you this. You know, this business of, oh boy, there's this business of gratitude. You know, we hear a lot about it. And I ran into a guy the other day who was truly a jewel of gratitude. You may not believe this, but this guy's actually older than me. And I was talking to him, and we were talking about gratitude. He said, I am truly grateful. He said, I've had a kidney transplant. I've had a knee replaced and a hip replacement. The loudest, the softest noise I can hear is a jet taking off. I got cataracts in both eyes. I got diabetes. I've had 2 bypass surgeries. I can hardly stand up. I can hardly walk, but I am truly grateful. I said, yeah, how come? He said, I still have my Florida driver's license. Oh, man. Does it make you as nervous as it makes me? You're out on the freeway, and there's some nearly dead there driving that car, and you can't even see their head. I mean, they're looking through the spokes of the wheel. Oh, man. I try to stay away from that. They're just about as bad as the people who do their meditation driving to work on the freeway. You ever hear people say that? Oh, yeah, I meditate on my way to work. So wait, please tell me when you're going to work so I can stay out of your way. Okay. Let's see, tonight we're going to be on page 64, 64.
Favorite page. Resentment is the number one offense.
Now then, we've read and taken a real hard look at the third step. You'll remember that the steps are there in a way which is entirely inspired, entirely logical, and they work together. And one depends upon the ones that came before it, and then builds toward the ones which come after it. The first step is absolutely essential, because until we are convinced that we're alcoholics, and until we are convinced that we can never safely drink alcohol again in any form the rest of our lives, we may take a stab at the 12 steps in the program of recovery, but almost always that's a useless and vain act, because when we hold anything back, any reservations about our situation, it means that it's very difficult for God to come in. We really are sitting around waiting for the next opportunity to safely drink. Once the first step is taken, then of course it becomes absolutely necessary that we begin to apply the solution. Now, one thing that's so critically important for us to remember is that the new person coming in is going to be given some really bad news. If you're an alcoholic like me, you have a disease which is invariably fatal. It is deadly, and it is incurable, and it is progressive, and if you don't stop drinking, you're going to die. But you can't stop drinking because you're powerless over alcohol. My God, what a dilemma to be in. But wait a second. There is a solution. You can't stop drinking on your own, but look at us. We have all found a solution, and the solution was to put a loving God between us and booze. And when we did that, the problem of alcohol was removed. It was gone. It didn't exist for us anymore. We were restored to sanity. And so what I can offer you, Mr. or Ms. Newcomer, is hope that you too can recover, but you're not going to be able to do it on the basis of self-knowledge. You're not going to be able to do it on the basis of being afraid of the consequences of your next drink. Fear of consequences never kept us sober. Self-knowledge doesn't keep us sober. Being entitled to your feelings doesn't keep you sober. Having spilled your guts in every meeting you ever went to won't keep you sober. The one thing that this program offers, and we're going to tell you right now, Mr. and Ms. Newcomer, it always works, is for you to get on a spiritual path, find a God of your own understanding, and surrender to that God. Now, the person who has a problem with that, and there are many, is now faced with the second dilemma, or we can say the second step. They're going to have to come to believe that this is true, that there is in fact a higher power, and that that higher power is strong enough to restore them to sanity. Not that God will, but that God can. So now we've got to take this leap forward. The second step accomplishes that. Once having accomplished that belief, now the third step is going to come along. In the third step, we're going to have to make a giant leap. We're going to have to go beyond the bare bones of the belief in a power which can restore us to sanity. We're going to have to make a decision to turn our lives and our will over to the care of that power. Where always before we have been taught and we've been fighting tooth and nail to control things, to make things happen, to be the master of our own ship. And yet as we get into the third step, and we've read the first parts of chapter 5, and we've come to understand and accept as a fact that there are certain things we must do, that others have done these things before us and it's worked for them. And especially we have been taught that the bridge of reason will not take us to the new land of faith. We're just not going to get there by trying to rationalize our way. One of the things that becomes apparent as we're going forward toward the third step is that this program is full of paradox. And paradox by definition is something other than what appears to be the truth. And so it becomes clear to us that we're going to have to consider that a power greater than us is going to be the answer to our problems. Not just the problem that we're bringing in the door, the putative problem of alcoholism or drug addiction, but all our problems. And then the big book takes us right into the truth. And the truth is that we have been trying to play God. Remember, it tells us, put aside, this is a paraphrase now, put aside all the notions you ever had about the blame that you can lay on other people, the responsibility which you can shuck off on your parents, on your dysfunctional family, on your lack of this or your excess of that, or that you have been abused in some way or another, or that there's a lack of salts in your body, on and on and on. And all these things have been spoon-fed to us and we've been told this is why you drink. And here are the triggers that you have to avoid. Well, if you get real honest about it, you realize there's no such thing as a trigger for us. We're going to drink whether it's good or bad, whether it's cold and rainy or hot and sunny. It doesn't matter, because when the obsession to drink hits, when one of those blind spots appears, it doesn't matter then what we've learned about ourselves or how scared we are of the next drink, the next drunk. We're going to drink. That's what obsession means. That's what compulsion means. And so we have to quit blaming others and blaming life and blaming God and blaming fate and accidents of birth. The big book says our problems are of our own making, that they arise out of ourselves. The alcoholic's an extreme example of self-will run riot. And then it tells us something very profound and kind of scary. We have to be rid of this selfishness. Above everything, we must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. Now, how in the world can that be? Well, go back to basics. I know we talk about this a lot, but it's so important for us to get in the habit of referring back to the basic stuff. We're alcoholics. We can't stop drinking on our own. If we don't stop drinking, we're going to die. And therefore, it's necessary for us to get a higher power between us and the booze. Now then, it becomes axiomatic, does it not, that if we are sitting there with a head full of selfish and self-centered and extreme, full of self-pity and self-justification and self-delusion, there's no room there for God. So we have to be rid of self. And we can't do this on our own. Here's the rub. It'd be nice if we could just recognize that this business of being selfish and self-centered has to go, and then we make up our minds to do it, and we get rid of self. It doesn't work that way. We may wish for it. We may want it with all our might. We may strive for it. And yet the needed power isn't there. In other words, we are as powerless over self as we are over alcohol. Now, when we start thinking in terms of powerlessness, then we have to remember that powerlessness extends far, far beyond powerlessness over alcohol. It extends to our entire life. But the big book says, however, God can restore us. God can take away our selfishness and our self-centeredness. And then after having taken a real good look at this and having come to a place where we're forced to admit that we've been trying to play God and it didn't work. And that's when the miracle kicks in. Having opened our minds to that extent, we suddenly realize that we have decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God is going to be our director. He's going to be the principal and we the agent. He will be the father, we will be the child. That's the decision of the third step. To implement that decision, then we go ahead with the third step prayer, where we offer our life and our will into God's hands, and we ask Him to take away this selfishness, to relieve us of the bondage of self, and we ask Him to make an example of us, of His power working in our lives, so we can be helpful to others. And then, as we're going through the book, and we've done our third step now, and we've made this offer to God, and in connection with that offer, we've made a commitment. The commitment is that we go forward and work the rest of the steps. Recognizing, here's the truth of it. The way the 12 steps work is very simple. First, we do what we can do. We do what we must do. And then God does what He promises. Now, we do what we must do, and then God does what He promises. And this goes on and on and on the rest of our lives. And all the 12 steps are set up that way. Look at the fourth step. The fourth step, we must take our inventory. Look at the fifth step. We must make the admissions. Then we go to God with the prayer to be relieved of these defects. Then we have to find out whom we have harmed. We have to be willing to make amends. Then we make amends, and as we're making amends, we're asking God for help. And as that happens, our guilt is removed. Well, now, when all of this has been done, and we've done these things that we're supposed to do, we get to the 10th step, and that's where it all really comes together. We enter the world of the Spirit, we're restored to sanity, we become God conscious, we develop a vital sixth sense, just as promised would happen. From there on, the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps will sustain us for the rest of our lives. So when we get over here on page 64, we're looking at the beginning of the fourth step. And at the top of page 64, it tells us this about the third step. And this is something which we talked about last week, but it's important for us to reiterate it. Though our decision, that is the decision to turn our life and will over the care of God, was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. The fourth step, the fifth step, the sixth step, the seventh step, the eighth step, and the ninth step. To face and to be rid of. We can face and we take to God, and God takes care of getting rid of these things for us. Because our liquor was but a symptom. And so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Now remember this business of liquor being a symptom. When we came in here, and sometimes we were taught to believe that liquor was the cause of all of this. That if we just stopped drinking, we'd be just fine. Well, that might be a simplistic way of putting it, but how does one stop drinking who can't stop drinking? If I am an alcoholic, I'm powerless over alcohol, which means I can't stop. How useless is it to say to me, don't drink? The big book never does. Rather, it says, look, the liquor was but a symptom. Symptom of what? We're going to find out as we go through this page 64. But it's true, and it's incredibly important for us to remember which side our toast is buttered on here. How many times have you dropped toast on the floor and you wanted to pick it up and eat it, but it fell on the butter and you can't do it? That's exactly what we're doing here sometimes. So, at once it tells us to get down to cases. Let's read the first full paragraph on page 64. Therefore, We started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. Well, that's exactly what our 4th step is. A fact-finding and fact-facing process. Now, it's important to remember that this 4th step is not designed to be an indictment of us. It is not designed for us to make ourselves bad people. It is designed for us to find out why we are sick. What is there about us that is keeping us ill? And especially, what is there about us that we can't fix ourselves, where we're going to need help? Going on, it is an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. Our object, one object, is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. Precisely our defects of character. Getting rid of them promptly and without regret. The 6th step and the 7th step. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. Now, right here is where we really get to start practicing some of this lack of self. That right here, self-delusion has to go out the window. We're talking about a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which are blocking us from God. And this obviously means that we're going to have to put aside all the rationalizations, all the denials, all the self-delusion, and get down to reality. Now, when we think about it this way, now we can understand why in chapter 5, right at the beginning, it tells us that those who do not recover are those who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So now, as we read this, we see where self-honesty becomes a major, major problem. As a matter of fact, it becomes clear in that first paragraph on page 58 that those who cannot be honest with themselves don't recover. Therefore, we can see that this program is not for sissies. This is not for wusses. It takes courage, because we have to face ourselves. Now, we're going to get some courage from God if we're willing to turn to Him and ask Him for help. But a lot of this has to do with us just pulling it up and getting it on and doing it. Being willing to face whatever it is we find. And remember that for most of us, we've been running from this stuff. We've been doing geographics from us. We have built up these fairy tales about ourselves, about how great we are and how wonderful we are, and what great personality and how smart we are. And how we've often go around telling everybody how the one person I really hate is a liar, knowing in ourselves that we're just the biggest liars on the block. All this phony baloney stuff that we've been purveying all this time, this image that we tried to build up and project to the outside world. And now we're going to have to put that all aside. All aside. Because looking back now again at the 3rd step, we saw that, damn it, it didn't work. We stayed sick and we got worse. And we came to a place where we could no longer evade or deny the seriousness of our illness and our position that we put ourselves in. So then it goes on to say this, 2nd full paragraph, we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. Now this goes right back to what we had just learned in the 3rd step, that our problems are of our own making, that they arise out of ourselves. Another place on that same page, it talks about decisions based on self, which would put us in a position to be heard. Think about that for a second. As we get into this, we begin to see the breadth and the scope of the problem and how much help we need and all the things that have to change in our lives. For example, we look back and we can see that we often, most of the time, we knew what was the right thing to do. We had a pretty well-developed sense of morals and ethics. In spite of that, we went against what we knew was right. We tried to rationalize it. We based our actions upon self. Decisions based on self. Putting aside the morals and ethics, catering only to self. And here again we see that the self manifested in various ways is what had defeated us. Now the big book is going to iterate this and reiterate this as we go through it, because it's the basic problem. Self denies God. Without God, we're dead ducks. Let's see why. The first of the manifestations of self, which the big book addresses and which we're going to inventory, is resentments. Now, just briefly, let's pause here. The fourth step is divided into 4 sections. The fourth step is a step which we write out. And we write out answers to questions. We write out names. We write down things that were done to us, and we write down things that we did to others. We write out our defects. We see what they are. The fourth step is not based in any way upon filling in forms or answering 697 questions. It's so bloody simple. And when we keep it simple and when we follow the directions here in the big book, it works. So first we have the resentments. Now, this is the first part of the fourth step. And in looking at our resentments, we're going to be doing something which we have skirted around and we've played with. We'd have a flavor of the week, a resentment of the week. We can concentrate on being angry with that person and planning revenge and letting that person run our life for that week. And then we find somebody else. And if we don't have somebody new, and it's pretty easy to get resentful about everybody in our life, we can go back and resurrect an old resentment and bring it up and regurgitate all of that. Because we get so used to the fact that we don't live our lives unless we resent somebody. So we're going to first look at our resentments. Now there's an interesting thing in this fourth step. Fourth step has all kinds of stuff going on in it. We're going to see this as we move through the fourth step. Just as a preview, the fourth step includes within it the full and complete spiritual remedy for resentments. As a matter of fact, one time Bill was asked, how do I know if I did a proper fourth step? And he said, if you got any resentments left when you finish, you didn't do it right. That's the truth, and we'll see that as we go through it. Once we've completed our resentment list and we have done the praying and we've gotten rid of those resentments with God's help, the next thing we're going to do is look at our own faults. Please notice, as we work our way through the big book on this fourth step, that the big book never indulges in any kind of comparative fault. It does not ask us to compare their fault with our fault, to compare our fault with their fault, to come to some kind of a vanilla meeting of the minds over here where nobody's at fault, because no wonder I did this to her, look what she did to me. No wonder what she did to me, look what I did to her. Oh, well, hell, let's just forget the whole thing. What it really boils down to is we get an opportunity to try to cancel out these resentments so we can say, well, hell, I don't have any resentments. Excuse my hells. But that's what we say sometimes. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. That is absolute balderdash. Because the resentments are like a bunch of damn termites. They sit down there in our basement. We don't even know they're there. They're eating away the foundations of our house. Every once in a while, one might fly out, and we say, I wonder if that's a termite. Oh, no, it couldn't be. Until one day, we're walking across the dining room floor, and we fall through. We say, oh, my gosh, I must have termites. Of course, now I got 2 broken legs. The termites are there. And the problem, one of the main problems is that if we don't approach this from the perspective of the fact that there are resentments and we got to find them, we're going to very likely miss a lot of stuff that's been eating us alive up to this time and will continue to do so. The third part of the 4th step is a fears list. Now, fear, it turns out, is that god-awful power which has warped and perverted our natural instincts. One of the strong parts of the 12 and 12 is in the 4th step, where Bill explains this business of natural instincts and how fear warps and perverts them. This is not in the big book, but he explains it very well in the 12 and 12. And it's important for us to understand that, because you see, when we think in terms of defects of character, it's kind of hard to know what they are. The 12 and 12 also identifies the defects of character as sin. Well, we don't deal with sin here, deadly or otherwise. This is not a religion. And so you can get real confused if you're not careful about what's what here. But it's quite clear that it is fear working on our natural instincts for sex, security, and society, which has warped and perverted these natural instincts, and that these are the things we talk about as defects of character. So we're going to write down our fears, and we're going to write down what caused them, and then we're going to ask God to take them away. And the big book says, as soon as you do that, at once you commence to outgrow fear. And by the time we get to the 5th step, what's the big book say? Our fears fall from us. They're gone. We got the complete spiritual answer to fear right here in the 4th and 5th steps. And yet people tell us, oh, you got to walk through fear. The greatest example of bravery is the person who does not quail at that which they fear, but walks through it. Well, why in the heck would you want to do that when you got a complete spiritual answer to fear and you don't have to have fear at all? You know, this is the crazy part of some of the stuff we do. If it is true, and I think it absolutely is, and I think most people agree with this, that fear is canceled out by sufficient faith. There is not room for faith and fear in the same house. And as faith grows, fear recedes. As faith grows very strong, fear seldom ever comes up again. As a matter of fact, our faith gets strong enough and we're able to honestly say that when I am afraid, I know I'm insulting God. I'm saying, God, I don't trust you. And so we need to be learning the spiritual solution to these defects of character rather than the human solution. People will tell us that there is appropriate anger. Well, everybody gets angry. There isn't a question whether you get angry or not, it's a question what you do with it. I'm sure you've heard that. And yet the big book tells us this is not so at all. It tells us that anger is a poison for we alcoholics. And so if somebody says to you, oh yes, there is appropriate anger, you ask him, is there also appropriate strychnine? Because that's the correct question. And then finally, we come to the sex inventory, which again is designed for us to elicit a good view of 2 of our natural instincts gone wild, selfishness and dishonesty. Now then, when we look then at the 4th step, we're going to find that there are 4 cardinal defects which are addressed in the 4th step, 4 only. Resentment, dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. The same 4 defects which appear again in the 10th step, and again in the 11th step. Resentment, dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. We get the 10th step, we go through the day, what do we watch for? Those 4 defects to crop back up. We get the 11th step, we're doing our 11th step inventory at night, what defects are we looking for? Those same 4. And we have our spiritual remedies that we've already learned that we're going to use to be freed from these defects when they come up. Why do we have to do that? You know, in the very beginning, in the first 2 or 3 years of this fellowship, the pioneers were pretty much in the dark about a lot of stuff. Because for one thing, they had their teachers were the Oxfordians. And the Oxford people believed that once having worked their 6 steps, the one became perfect. They taught perfection was the result of doing this work that they had. Just the same as first century Christians became perfect in their eyes. Our guys find that wasn't true at all. What they found was that these defects of character, which they had picked up in their inventory and had admitted at the time that they did their admission to another human being and to God, that they cropped back up. What they saw was just a simple fact of life. That the world and all of its people continue to threaten us. Threat equals fear, and fear equals the warping and the rewarping of natural instincts, therefore, ergo, the return of defects. Now, not once did they ever say to themselves, oh, well, these defects come back because God doesn't take them. You know, kind of sneer, snicker. God doesn't take all your defects. You know, you got to work on them. And every time we do that, guess what we're doing? In ourselves, of our own volition, we are limiting God's power to act in our lives. But every time we put limitations on God's power to act in our lives, we to that extent have limited God's ability to help us. The moment that we do that, we are in a self-defeating cycle of denial, which can easily lead us right back out because it can destroy our spiritual fitness. The truth of the matter is that nothing's past God's power, and as soon as I open up my mind and my heart to Him and I say, God, these are the things which are killing me, these are the things I cannot live with longer, I need to be freed with them, please God, take these from me, He will, and He does. The 10th step recognizes that the world and its people will continue to threaten us, and therefore we will have recurrence of these very same defects. Not the same resentments, obviously, not the same fears necessarily, but new and different ones, because it's all out there. And if you've been living out there in the so-called real world for very long, you know just what I'm talking about. I mean, that's idiot city out there. You want to talk about selfishness and self-centeredness, just look at either side of you. If you work in an office, look around, listen. This doesn't make people bad, it just means that that's the way they are. Not only selfishness and self-centeredness, but fear and fear and fear and fear. And fear is very contagious and very toxic. And if we live in an atmosphere of fear, if our home is filled with it, we're going to be constantly infected with it. We can't help ourselves. It's worse than the Asian flu. And so what they found was they had to have a way daily to be constantly set free from these things. Why? Because they block us from God. If I am going to stay close to God and perform His work well, then I have to have a way to do that. I have to have a way to stay free of the things that block me from Him, my defects, my insanities, and my guilts. And the 10th step does that for us. That's why we have a 10th step. So now if we look at the 4th step, and we're going to find this as we go through it, it accomplishes 5 major things. Aside from the fact that we have done our inventory, we've gotten honest for the first time perhaps, the 5 things, we're going to lose our resentments. We have the complete spiritual solution to resentment. We're going to commence to lose our fears. We're going to have an ideal for how we wish to live our future relationship lives. We're going to have a list of the people we've harmed and become willing to make amends to them. In other words, our 8-step list will be done in our 4-step. And we're going to have a list of our defects of character, which we're going to carry forward with us into the 5th step. All of these things are accomplished by a proper 4-step. Now let's see the bottom of page 64. We're going to get started now with our resentments. Resentment is the number 1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. That's why alcohol is but a symptom. Alcohol and the imbibing of alcohol and the drunken sprees are symptomology of a spiritual illness. And this is basic core stuff to the whole program of the 12 steps, to understand this. Now, the next sentence is one of the great promises in the Big Book, and it is true. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And unfortunately, the human solutionists out there got it backwards. They tell us first we got to get you well physically and mentally, then you can get well spiritually. It's just the opposite. And I've been around doing this stuff now for over 38 years, and I can tell you that I have seen miracles of recovery mentally and physically that boggle the minds of the professionals. They can't understand it. I'm talking about things that are miracles. But my goodness, there is nothing past God's power. Why is it that we would limit His power to heal us? This doesn't mean that we're faith healers or anything like that. What we're saying is very simple. What the Big Book is telling us is the truth. That when the spiritual malady is overcome, we do straighten out mentally and physically. In the chapter 2, The Family Afterward, it tells us that financial recovery always follows spiritual recovery, never precedes it. And yet how many people will tell you that the only way that I'm going to be able to really get this is when I get a job and I get some money coming in. It's just the opposite. I can tell you that years ago, I was asked to help some guys in Tampa. There were 8 of them. They were all sick with AIDS. We went through the steps together. And all of them worked their steps hard. They all developed a high degree of spiritual fitness. This was many years ago. And 7 of those men are still alive. And I can tell you that the doctors don't know what the heck happened. They can't believe it. One of them, Billy, died. Billy came over here, and I was with him for the last couple of months before he died. The day before Billy died, I was doing a Big Book study for Sober on South Beach. And they used to have a room up above on the 2nd floor on Washington Street. The day before Billy died, he walked up the stairs to that meeting, and he shared a message of hope and love and spiritual growth, and it was beautiful. And that night he died. The other 7 are still alive, and believe me, this was a long time ago. They are medical miracles. You never read about them in journals because the medical profession can't explain them. Now, you talk to anybody who's been around with this stuff for a while, and they're going to all tell you the same kind of story. Sometimes you don't want to do it because you think maybe people won't believe you or think you're bragging or something, but this is true. There are miracles of recovery all around us, and there are people in this room, I promise you right now, whose stories are neither false nor apocryphal, they're true, who, if they were to sit down with you face to face, could tell you stories of miracles that have happened in their lives, miracles of recovery. You see, it's absolutely true that so long as we say God can't do it or won't do it, it won't happen. As long as we say God can do it, and I'm going to open myself up to Him and see what happens, it does happen. It's beautiful stuff. Think about it another way, guys. Do you accept, ask yourself this, do I accept that I have a disease which is invariably fatal and is incurable and progressive? If I accept that as a fact, then what hope do I have? Well, I have one hope, that there is a power out there, my higher power, God, who will permit me to be in a state of remission for the rest of my life. And there isn't a single doctor, psychiatrist, or treatment center out there that can do that. There's no holistic healer. And I can tell you this too. Most of the ministers, rabbis, priests, and monsignors have given up on it as well. There's something that we have here which is utterly priceless and unique. What we have is the great spiritual principles which have been enunciated for all time, as far back as we can trace. And everybody is willing to accept that these spiritual principles are true and they're extant and they're part of our heritage. And we hear them preached from every pulpit. But when did anybody ever tell you how to do it? We can say it's wonderful that I ought to be this way. I agree, that's the way I ought to be. Tell me, how do I get there? 12 steps answer that question, don't they? You see, 12 spiritual principles restated as steps of action, which if we take those steps and we do the work, what happens is that we incorporate those great spiritual principles into our very being. They become a part of us, and they become the way we live our lives. That's why the big book says the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. That's why the 12th step says practice these principles in all your affairs. It's exactly what it means. We have the great miracle of the ages, all these spiritual principles restated as steps of action. And all we have to ever do is pick them up and follow directions and do the work, and it works. And it never fails. And if anybody in here is new and you're wondering, do I get into all this stuff or not? I say to you, think about this. Do you value your spirit? Do you value your life? Do you value your soul? Do you have any value whatsoever? If you say, yes, I do have, I believe that, ask yourself, well then what are you going to do about it? You have a responsibility to save that. Save what God gave you. Remembering that God is spirit and we are spirit, He is of us and we are of Him. But it's up to us. If it's to be, it's up to me. I've got to do the work. First I do what I'm supposed to do, then God does what He promises. Then I do what I'm supposed to do, then God does what He promises for the rest of my life. And when we do that, it works. Absolutely works. I promise you. Thank you.